Okay, well, I'll just go ahead and get started. And as people come in, that's fine. They have some place to sit. I'm Kelly Christopher. I am the founding executive director of the STEM Greenhouse. It's an organization that I founded 5 years ago to prepare vulnerable children for careers in STEM. So I just want to give you an idea of what we're going to go over today. I'm going to introduce you to pretty much myself, give you some statistics about Grand Rapids, some national statistics as it relates to population and STEM and science and engineering, diversity versus inclusion, learning a little bit about what's the difference with that, equity solutions in education. What are some solutions? What are some solutions for equity in the workplace? What is equity? And then finally, we'll have some time for questions. And I hope you have some questions. That's where it gets fun. Okay, so who am I? Oops, sorry. Okay, so I'm from Grand Rapids. Those of you, how many of you are from Grand Rapids? Raise your hand if you're from Grand Rapids. Okay, well that's helpful. So if you're from Grand Rapids, you kind of get the lay of the land. I went to Grand Rapids Public Schools. I graduated from Ottawa Hills High School. I was the valedictorian of my class, and I decided to go to North Carolina A&T State University for my undergraduate degree, which is in agricultural and biosystems engineering. Those of you who may not know, North Carolina A&T is a historically black college and university. It was a wonderful experience. Some of you, if you have attended other universities, what we call a historically black college, we say at HBCU, primarily white institution, we call a PWI. So if you attended a PWI, probably some of the similar things that made that experience good for you make a historically black college really good for people of color. So then I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for my master's degree and my PhD in agricultural engineering. My experience there was very interesting. As you know, most engineering disciplines, science disciplines, are primarily white male. In agricultural engineering, you have that addition of white, male, and redneck. So you have, I remember going to conferences and all the people from Texas, and they had their big belt buckles and their cowboy boots and their hats, and and I was trying to become a national officer in the student organization. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to somehow get in on this crowd. But anyway, so at the University of Illinois, I'm the only black person who's ever gotten a PhD out of the agricultural engineering department. And I say black person, not African American, because black people can come from all over the world, but they don't necessarily consider themselves African American. In addition, I was the third black woman in the world to get a PhD in agricultural engineering. So this is a field that is, like I said, is very much dominated by white men. So after I graduated, I worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. My particular research involved a lot of environmental engineering as it relates to agricultural pollutants, drainage, water quality, that sort of thing. So while I was an engineer, I kind of decided that I had very young children at that time, and I decided I wanted to move away from engineering and do programming with children. I did a lot of programs for my own children, and I started a business, and I'll talk a little bit about it later, but in doing my business, I realized I was not interacting with the students that I thought I would be working with. I was not affecting the change that I wanted to see, so I started the STEM Greenhouse 5 years ago, so I could specifically focus on people of color, females who would need preparation for STEM careers. So this is just some information about Grand Rapids, and this comes from the U.S. Census, so it's a little bit, it's not quite the same as some of the other data I have. So for example, you don't see Hispanic on this because people can identify as Hispanic, and they could be black, they could be white, or whatever. So they don't have Hispanic or Latino as a race. But so like if it says 68% of the people in Grand Rapids are white, some of those people are probably Hispanic. Maybe some of the black people are Hispanic as well. But as you can see, even from this, 20% of the population in Grand Rapids is black, but I don't know, at this conference, that's 1 out of 5. In this particular room, I don't see 1 out of 5 people here that's black. I don't know, maybe you've been in the previous session, I haven't, so you tell me, I don't know. I'm just guessing that 1 out of every 5 participants in this conference is not black, So let me give you a little bit more about Grand Rapids. Most of you are from Grand Rapids, but not everyone. Grand Rapids has been touted as a really great place. And I think a lot of Grand Rapids people will say that. It's the it ranks number 4 in the best cities for first-time home buyers, was the number 1 city to raise a family. However, out of the 52 largest cities in America, Grand Rapids ranks 51st economically for African Americans. If you ask an African American what they think about Grand Rapids, not many people are moving here because of how wonderful Grand Rapids is for African Americans. I came back because my family is from here, but this is a hard place to attract diverse talent because Grand Rapids itself, African Americans do not have a lot of economic power. They don't make a lot of the decisions in Grand Rapids. So there are some things about Grand Rapids that could be a little bit better. Okay, so let's look at the STEM profession, because really, I'm assuming that all of you are here because you're interested in actually solving some of these issues that we have in STEM. And especially in science and engineering. We're not including the health professions. The health professions are a little bit more diverse, especially in terms of women. Women do represent a much more broad population of the health professions. But in just science and engineering, you can see that as far as versus the US population, white women and men are 66% of the science and engineering profession. And there's 3 times as many white men as women. You can also see that in the US population, there's 13% black, 17% Hispanic, but in science and engineering, you have 5 and 6%. So it's a much smaller representation of people of color, Hispanics and black people in science and engineering. And so why is that? What can we do about that? That's really what the question is. Now, these are projections for 2050 by the Pew Research Center. In 2050, the white population will be 48% of the population. The black population will remain 13%. The Asian and Hispanic populations will increase. So that's what they're projecting. But we can only imagine as the population grows, if we maintain the same percentages in terms of Hispanics and black people in STEM professions, we are not going to have enough STEM professionals because we need to diversify for our future, really. So, I mean, most of you are in STEM, I assume. You probably have difficulty already filling positions. You find that there's just not enough candidates. And even if you do find candidates, you're not finding a diverse pool of candidates for the positions that you have. So now we'll kind of go into some of the solutions, but first we have to discuss what is diversity versus inclusion. So diversity is simply difference. Could be any type of difference. It could be racial, it could be gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. Diversity is just difference, and that's all. But then there's inclusion. And here the definition says incorporating different people in a singular platform where they are respected and valued. So you might have an organization that is diverse, meaning there are people of color, that it looks diverse, there are women, there are people of color in your organization, and yet not everybody has really an influence. You know what I'm saying? So if they can be there and the organization can look diverse, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's inclusive because not everybody's voice matters and not everybody's voice is heard. So we want to have diverse and inclusive spaces for education and the workplace. Now, equity is an approach that ensures everyone access to the same opportunities. Now, this is a utopia, is never, We would love for that to be the case, but that is just not going to happen in my lifetime. People do not have equal access to the same opportunities. But equity recognizes that advantages and barriers exist, and that as a result, we all don't start from the same place. And I think most people can at least agree to that. We all do not start from the same place, even within a race. There's some people who have advantage and some that have disadvantages. So equity is a process that begins by acknowledging that unequal starting place and continues to correct and address the imbalance. And I think that a lot of organizations, perhaps in Grand Rapids, it's not that they don't understand that there is an imbalance. They're just not really willing to do anything about it. You know, they want diversity, and yet they don't really want to do anything. They just want to pray or just hope that miraculously things change without any change to address the imbalance. So that leads me to this STEM greenhouse. Why did I found this organization? And what does the greenhouse mean? Because a lot of people, they think that I actually have a greenhouse somewhere, you know. And the greenhouse is really just a metaphor. Because in my experience, in fact, let me tell you about really the first experience that led me to start the STEM greenhouse. I was working, at this time I just had a business, and I spent most of my time in Forest Hills and East Grand Rapids working with students who already have a lot of resources. The things that I was doing, those STEM things I was doing with them is just like icing on a cake. They already have everything they need. They have people in their lives who are already engineers, scientists, or whatever. They have wealth. They have, you know, I remember there was once a little boy who was 7, and he was in one of my camps in East Grand Rapids. He says, Dr. Christopher, what is your PhD in? I said, oh, it's in agricultural engineering. He said, well, you know, my mom and dad, they both have PhDs and MDs. I said, well, are they research scientists? He said, yeah, my dad studies Alzheimer's disease and my mom studies depression. Now, he's 7, and he has a little brother who was 5, was also in the program, and I thought to myself, now this kid has access to pretty much everything. Like, trying to be a scientist or engineer is not going to be foreign to them at all. When I was growing up, I thought someone with a PhD in engineering was like an alien, okay? Because I couldn't even relate. I didn't know anybody who was an engineer, let alone a scientist or an engineer with a PhD. So I couldn't even fathom myself going into these fields. But anyway, so I have these experiences in Forest Hills, East Grand Rapids. But then I had an opportunity to do a few workshops or presentations at Gerald R. Ford, which is a school in Grand Rapids. And I'm working with middle school students. And I'm playing a very simple math game, having them play a very simple math game. And I see a student struggling. And so I go up to her and I say, you know, I think if you use division, you can get the answer that you want. And the young lady, she said, Dr. Christopher, can you remind me, what is division? Now, this person is in 8th grade, about to go to 9th grade, and she didn't say, what is 8 divided by 4? Because she didn't know that. She doesn't even know what division is. And I'm thinking, wow, this is so, and you know, where's the equality here? Because I have kids who have every resource, and then this person doesn't even know what division is, and they're about to go into the 9th grade. And I don't blame her. It's not her fault that she doesn't understand what division is. It's just a system that has obviously failed you if you can get all the way to the 8th grade and not know what division is. So that's when I started the STEM greenhouse. In addition, and I'll show you some pictures of my students, I found that the STEM education opportunities for kids was a lot like just throwing seeds to the wind, and that's where the whole greenhouse theme comes in to play. We're hoping that magically some student who's in poverty, who doesn't have anyone that looks like them in this particular field or profession, will just magically grow and be successful in STEM when there's so many barriers to their success. And even there's a parable in the Bible where Jesus talks about spreading seeds and some falling into shallow soil, some on the road and all of that. And I really decided that I wanted to have an organization that focuses on preparing students for STEM careers, not just hoping that they somehow magically are successful, because there's so many things. You know, my students have all kinds of trauma. Poverty is a very stressful situation. When you have an entire school where everyone is poor, it impacts their behavior. Stressed out kids don't act the same as kids who are not stressed. You know, kids who have food and lights and heat and all of that don't act the same as kids who struggle with those things. So I've really enjoyed working with the STEM greenhouse, or doing this work. So let's go over some of the equity solutions in education. So, and I mentioned this a little bit, but first there are exposure pieces, and this it could be a field trip. It could be, you take the kids to a university, they go and look at some robots and everything. These are all wonderful exposure experiences. They may have never heard of these careers before. However, if a student is not prepared to even go to college, like, what is the purpose of that field trip? You know, that was just an exercise. I don't even know what the point of it was, because if you go to an Ottawa Hills High School, like where I went to and was able to take like 5 AP classes and stuff, now everybody's on credit recovery. They can barely graduate. It's totally different. So, and then there's some experiences, you might have like a week of camp at Grand Valley, and you tell a little middle school girl, she's 12 years old, all right, I hope you enjoyed that week of camp. Good luck becoming an engineer. We'll see you in 5 years. What is the likelihood that a child that does not have resources is going to be able to successfully access that career? They have so many other things that are in the way. So we just have to, I find that we are not really thinking realistically. And that's why I'm focused on the preparation piece, trying to make sure that students are prepared for those careers. It's wonderful to see different careers, but if you're not prepared to go to college, it's really, I'm not saying it's a complete waste of time, but it's really throwing seeds to the wind, honestly. So also making STEM attractive. So this is another equity solution. I find this particularly interesting because I was that kid myself. When I was a little girl, I didn't like math. Why? Because I did not know one woman who liked math. Now I love math, but there was a time when I hated it. Why would I like it? I didn't know anybody who liked math. Then, I get to high school and I'm doing good in math and science. I go to all these math and science summer camps, and I remember being at University of Michigan, and you go to one department and you hear some old white men and maybe an Asian man tell you, oh, engineering is great, and then you go to another department, the same thing, and I'm thinking, I do not want to be a 50-year-old white man when I grow up. So of course this is not attractive to me at all. So when it wasn't until I actually saw a black female engineer that I even thought, oh, we can do this? It's research has shown that black students, people of color, learn best from teachers that are people of color. White students learn best from teachers who are who look white or look like them. There's nothing, that's just the reality. We don't see ourselves in a position. It's hard for us to want to pursue it. I came across this quote last week, and I'm glad I did. And it says, poverty is not the root cause of inequities in education, it's racism. Talking about poverty drives us to focus on charity instead of acts of justice. So I work in a couple of schools that are K through 8 schools, and I have students who are in middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. They do not have science teachers. They do not have math teachers. They just have one teacher, just like elementary school. But imagine the quality of your science and math education when you don't have a dedicated professional who's a dedicated math teacher, who's a dedicated science teacher. In fact, they don't hardly even work on science, because that teacher that they do have, probably science is not their thing, And I know that just would not be acceptable if they were white. Like, I feel like that's a racist situation. Nobody would allow their children to go to a middle school and not have a science teacher, not have a math teacher. But that's what the students that I work with, that's what they get, the very least amount. And then we wonder, none of the kids are proficient in science. Their math scores are horrible. I wonder, it must be them. They're just stupid. It's not their fault. You have a question, because you look like you just,
I actually saw coming from before
Yes, okay. Yes.
And this question, this quote is, I'm struggling with it because
Okay.
we know, like, absolutely, SES is a better predictor of performance in school than races, and that ought to be obvious, right? Like,
Yeah.
white kids aren't born with more aptitude than black kids,
Yes.
and so it should be obvious that it's not race that predicts how well you're going to do academically. It's opportunity, and SES is the big piece. So I'm super curious about this. Poverty is not
Well, I think what they're,
the root cause of inequity, so he's pushing it back a layer.
yeah.
It's not the achievement. It's the step behind that, which is
Well,
the
well, and you may
Can I
have,
offer a thought?
okay, go ahead.
It isn't race, it's racism.
Yeah, exactly.
It isn't race, it's racism.
I don't know, but I'm
Well, and I'll bring this around. So, you can have Bill Gates, he has lots of money, Mark Zuckerberg. They've tried to solve some of these problems and they realize that money is not gonna, it is not the solution. You can pour all this money, but that's not, you're not getting rid of the inequality, the justice piece. So that as long as we just say, okay, well, we're gonna make sure everybody has lunch. We're going to make sure everybody has a nice building. We're going to give everybody a Chromebook. That doesn't really, there's a lot more that goes into that poverty. I mean, it could be as simple as, okay, now someone has a record, a criminal record, where if they were white, they would not have a criminal record because it was a very minor offense. And they have parents and people who can take care of those type of things. But now because of the inequity in our criminal justice system, that impacts that person's income for the rest of their life, and then it impacts their children. So there's so many things that, money is just not the solution. We really have to try to get to those root causes. And actually, Kenwood does a pretty good job, compared to some other districts of trying to address some of these things. Yeah.
one other question that was on your previous slide.
Sure. Oh, go ahead. Well, that's fine.
So on your previous slide, you had the four solutions, the exposure,
Experience.
and number 4 is super interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because when I was teaching, that was the primary struggle. It was, what is the compelling reason that this kid would want to go into STEM? What is the value proposition? Like, what do I love that I'm going to get because I choose to be good at math and go into STEM? What practical ways have you found of talking in those terms and making that, helping a kid have a vision for, like, here's the stuff I love, here's the stuff I want in my life, and this is a way of achieving that and of doing that.
Well, since you're a teacher, you probably can say that of your black male students, 80% of them wanted to be a professional athlete when they graduate. Or, that's their dream. And even my son, who I've tried to keep out of basketball, it's an overwhelming narrative in our media because they see black men doing that career and they're successful at it. They don't see themselves in science and engineering positions. And even, I have students who, if there's a student who may be white, but they have a uncle, somebody is an engineer or scientist in their network, they can see themselves in those positions. But when you have nobody to look to, so I'll be honest, it makes a difference that I'm there and I'm working with them. And it makes a difference that not only do they see me one time, but they get to know me and they get to see me at the grocery store with my kids because they're like, engineers have kids, you go to church, what? I used to think that all scientists and engineers were atheists, because I didn't have anybody in my world to tell me any differently. And so the more that we can connect to them and show them people that are just like them, if I see one of them at a party and I'm dancing, they're like, oh, Dr. Christopher dances, like, that's amazing. When was the last time you saw an engineer dance? Probably wasn't very good. So, and it's hard. There's really, I'm telling you, it's hard for, especially a lot of white teachers. They cannot necessarily give their student, they can't, as much as they would love to, that student looks at you and says, you are a mile away, you're miles away from me in our experiences.
Is there another, so that's like brute imitation,
Yeah.
right? Like I see myself psychology has made it super clear we're capable of empathizing more with people who look like us.
Mm-hmm.
But are there other ways than brute imitation? Like really, like I keep coming back to that question of like, here are the things I love, here are the things I value, and this can be a way of me getting the things I love, getting the things I value.
I have seen it work sometimes. However, it is just more difficult and it takes a lot more time because you have to develop a relationship with the student so that they really trust you. And if you only have a year with them, you may never really get that. And it's sad, but that's just kind of the reality. I wish I could say that there was some magic bullet, that there was some curriculum, there's some program that would make it easier, but there just really isn't right now. So, but if I ever come up with anything, I'll get your card or something. If I come across something, I'll let you know. So what can we do? All right. Well, we can advocate for all children to receive a quality education. And advocate is kind of a big term. I'm not talking you're going to board meetings or whatever, but sometimes just even in your own little circles of people that and you hear them make comments and things. And, I've heard people say, oh, these teachers, they're just here for a paycheck and they don't care about the kids. And I'm thinking, I've never really experienced a teacher like that. Or they'll just think, oh, these kids, it's just a kind of a hopeless cause. They're all just going to get pregnant and do whatever anyway. When you hear these things, just be that voice of reason. In addition, you can vote for adequate resources for schools and teachers. The class sizes are too big. Like, I don't like working with more than 20 kids, and that's a struggle for me. So I don't know how somebody can work with 30, 35, even 40 kids sometimes. That's impossible. I just can't even imagine it. And then there's also relationship building. So for example, when someone, hears about my program and they're like, oh, I want to come and, volunteer one day with the kids. And I feel, unless they are an amazing person that will really add value to my students' lives, I usually don't want them to come, because if you're not going to invest in building a relationship with them, then it's almost pointless for you to come and just interrupt their learning. So I would much rather someone who says, okay, I'm willing to invest. But if you're not, there are other things you can do, but just don't think, that one visit and seeing an engineer is really gonna move the needle for them, because they really need to know you. And then finally, you can support organizations that are doing the work that's important to you or your organization. And this is kind of selfish because I feel like I have an organization that is worthy of some support. But I find that, like in my work, I find that many more resources are given, even for STEM, to organizations like the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA. They'll get $1 million grants, and I'm like, can I get $2,000, please? Those organizations are not STEM organizations. They don't even have a scientist on staff. They have some curriculum that they've, bought. They take a couple of college kids out to do it, and they wonder, this is not working. I just recently received an award from the ELO network, which does after-school providers, because what they found is, wow, Keli's programs are actually moving the needle. Things are changing. These kids are they want to go to college, they want to take advanced math classes. Their math growth is triple what everybody else's is. I wonder why, and I'm just like, well, I'm the only engineer that's doing this work. Everybody else is a social worker or a teacher or something, and they don't necessarily even know what it takes to go into a STEM career. So there are opportunities for you to, if you have an organization that either wants to give financially, or just people in conversations that are happening, somebody needs to be in that room that really knows what they're talking about. Hey, let me know. I'll be more than willing to come and offer my expertise. So also for the workplace, diversity training. There was a time when I wasn't sure if this was necessary, but I do believe now that there are some organizations that offer diversity training, and it is very helpful. I remember a time when I was working for the USDA, and we were going to this farmer's farm for some type of project, and I was the engineer on the project. The soil scientist was a black man, and then there was a district conservationist who was a white man. And so we walk up to the farmer, and the farmer's an older white gentleman, and he says, Oh my goodness, 2 colors and a white man. I didn't think I'd ever see this. He said, but you know what? It's okay because if you work hard, you can be just as good as a white man. And I thought, thank you. What kind of, what I found is that even though he said it out loud, there's so many people that's just kind of in their background mind, that somehow kids and people of color have to work extra hard because there's still a superiority mindset. And so, for example, when I went to graduate school, I did not list my race or my gender on my application. I got some really great fellowships from the National Science Foundation, the EPA, but they were merit-based. They were just only merit-based. But as I walked around in my conversations with people, the assumption was that I was here because I was a minority student, that my money that I got for my fellowship was all because I was a black woman. And before I graduated, I had to go to the registrar's office and have them, because when you don't list your race on a form, I guess white is the default. So they had me listed as a white female. So I came to the registrar's office. I don't know why I cared, but I'm like, I want the university to get credit for the one black person that graduated. So let me change my race, please, in the system. But it's like we can't be excellent on our own. We had to have some help, and I think that that's just a misconception. So for example, do not assume that all people the color are the same. I've had people that assume I'm liberal, assume that I grew up poor, assume that I'm a first generation college student. That's just an assumption a lot of people make, but you don't want to assume that. And also, be willing to sow seeds without a guarantee of a harvest. This is really challenging because the reality is racism is not going anywhere. The gender inequality, poverty is not going anywhere. So I know we would all like to see a diverse, computer science, engineering field tomorrow, but this is a generational problem. You will have to be willing to sow some seeds and never really see a diverse profession in your career. That's just the reality. Because the work that I'm doing with middle school students, I don't even expect all of my middle schools, I don't expect very many of them to go into STEM professions, honestly. But my goal is that they would all go to college and that they would create a lifestyle so that their children would have better education and opportunities, and that maybe some of them would become STEM professionals. So I'm looking generations down. I'm trying to, poverty is a generational problem. I'm trying to break those cycles of poverty. So, and also don't be satisfied with bare minimum diversity. You get one person of color in your staff and you're like, okay, we're done. We're diverse now. But I can guarantee you that one person of color is thinking they better hire somebody else because this is just boring. It's not as much fun when you're the only one. Okay, so at attracting diverse talent, unfortunately, diversity attracts diversity. So if you want to get a diverse candidate and you bring them here and to Grand Rapids and they come to your company and there's nobody that looks like them, your chances of attracting that candidate are small. But it doesn't mean that you don't try. You might have to sweeten the pot to get them to come here, but I think it's worthwhile. You have to recruit where diversity exists. I was talking to the city of Grand Rapids and they said they recruit from Ferris where there's no black students. So if there's no black students there, why are you recruiting there and expecting it to be diverse? You need to go to the universities that have the black students that you want. And that might mean you have to go to the South and go to a historically black college or university to attract the right talent. And then also get connected in Grand Rapids. So most people do know some black people in their lives, but there are organizations. So for example, I'm in a sorority. If someone who you are recruiting is in the same sorority, having that connection with me would be beneficial because I could connect them to a lot of other people. Whether it's I'm an Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, there's Jack and Jill of America, that's an organization for black families and children. So there's lots of different connections that you could make that could be helpful when you're trying to recruit a diverse pool. Okay, so retaining diverse talent. Relationships are very important. So one of the things that often for people of color is very difficult because we see people get promoted that are not as qualified as us, or don't have the education that we have, but they do. But this happens because there's relationships that are formed between people who are just similar. You know, I'm not going to have the same relationship with the boss as maybe someone else who goes to his church, who, you know, they just have more in common. So try to keep those type of things out of the equation as people advance. Support events and projects that celebrate non-majority cultures. So if you're always supporting the same events, you know, the Red Cross, those are all wonderful opportunities, but try to support some that celebrate non-majority cultures. Recognize that some current corporate events may not be inclusive and make adjustments as necessary. So for example, golf. You know, I know a lot of companies that like to have golf events, but golf, it caters to a certain population. If you played golf growing up, you were likely in a community that was wealthier. You're probably not a person of color. It doesn't happen all the time, but just realize that, and perhaps you can change some things up. Be intentional about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and that just simply means you have to do something. You know, nothing's going to happen if you don't do anything. It's not going to magically happen. Try to do something to get a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable workforce. So, let's see. We're kind of low on time, and I know we started a little bit late. But are there any questions before? Yes. Hi. Oh my gosh, yeah, okay. Good to see you again.
Uncovered very thoroughly the sort of baseline expectation you have that's basically getting helping us
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's, I think the most common counter argument is a sort of division one idea that the bigger the talent pool, the better the quality, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's just a sort of flat baseline statistical expectation that amongst people of color, there are a few dynamic personalities that if we don't get them in STEM, we lose their talent.
Yeah.
My guess is that we need to flip that script even further and say that there are specific STEM sources of genius and talent that aren't just sort of a baseline statistical probability that they exist, but that there are assets
Mm-hmm.
that we need.
Yeah.
Right, that it will double and redouble our efforts, that we'll find resources that outstrip just the statistical probability.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you've experienced that, or what you would say, if there is such a narrative, what's the most likely source of it? What is it about being in the demographic you're working with that would be better for STEM?
Well, and I was, I don't know, I was just listening or reading something that addressed this. There was a person who was a person of color who wrote about this specifically, and I probably, if I have the article, I can try to forward it to you. But basically what the article was saying is that when you have a more diverse workforce, you just get better solutions to whatever problem that you're working on, because people are looking at things from this different ways. There's all kinds of diversity, as I mentioned before, but we certainly there's a benefit to diversity beyond just having more numbers or whatever. There is. I don't have a lot of experience with it myself, just because I've always been the only one, and I don't know, I can't say from my own experience exactly how that would be impacted in an organization. But I do believe it's true. Like, I do believe that there's more that can be brought to the table with a more diverse workforce, and that's why I'm trying to do the work that I'm doing. So, yes. Okay. Mhm. 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 Oh, it wasn't recognizing their color. Yeah. We were talking about something like that the other day, about like facial recognition technology, and when it's tested all on white men, it's not recognizing people of other races. It's not doing as good of a job. So it's really good to have people in the room that are thinking those things and making those suggestions, so that you can be more profitable, you know. Yes.
So, you were mentioning that this isn't like one simple fix. Okay, well, let's just have STEM day,
Mm-hmm.
in the school year. But has research shown that there is one thing that really works best for getting kids to be interested in
Okay. Yes, and what they found out was that dosage matters. That's really all that, and I think that that's true for anybody, right? If you only go one time or 1 week, you're only going to get a certain result. And so they found that programs where the kids met every week all year, twice a week, every day after school, whatever, those were more successful. Who would have thunk it, It's just, so, and it's not to say that we can't have those experiences, those 1 week, those 1 day things, but I think it's better to work within a framework of this is just a piece of what we want to develop for them for their STEM education. This is not going to be the whole, that we have to help kids get where they need to go with a variety of different opportunities. Okay. Well, I hear people clapping in the other room, so I'm assuming we probably have to go. So if there aren't any other questions, and also I have a card, you can connect with me afterwards. Yes.
Can I ask everyone to take the survey?
Oh yes, I do. You can go to the website. It's only 3 questions, and you can win a gift card. I wish I could do that with my students. Take this test. There's a $50 gift card you can win. But it's funny because my students don't know how to use gift cards. I gave them movie gift cards. They still have them. They're like, they don't even know how to use them. That's sad, isn't it? Like, that's how hard it is for them to get to a movie theater. That they're like, I still have mine from 6 months ago. We still haven't gone to the movies. So this is just sad. Yes. With the kids? Well, right now I meet twice a week. So I'm at 2 schools and I'm twice a week at each school, and I have an assistant. And my goal is, as I grow, I may only be able, me personally, I may only be able to come once a week. But it's not, like I said, this goes for 20 weeks, 20 some weeks. So I am able to develop a relationship with them. And then I come in because I want it to be a mentoring thing just as much as it is just an educational thing. So no, I do MLK and Dickinson. So Dickinson is where I went to elementary school, and they have a high refugee population. So for example, I have a large population of students that cannot read and are not good writers, and their vocabulary is not very good. It doesn't mean that they can't achieve, but if you come to this country in middle school and you can't read, you're at a big disadvantage. So I have to tailor my curriculum to kids who can't read or can read very little. And there's really no curriculums available for middle school students where they don't have an expectation that they're reading. So, all right, is that it? Thank you very much.